Hajime no Ippo is a story I think anyone can appreciate. The story of an underground up-and-coming boxer who takes the world by storm is a tale as old as Grandpa Joe. Each and every time, their stories can speak to us on the most raw emotional level. So, how did it all begin?
Swagger down the street with your red lips and funky beat. You better hold your head up to the sky. I'm gonna roll with you till the day I die.
The manga was released in October 1989, published by Kodansha. The new shonen was an immediate hit in Japan and up to this year was able to sell over 100 million copies worldwide. Sports anime has always been a really tricky thing to digest because the usual gateway for entry is for someone to, like the sport. For example, I didn't have the slightest interest in volleyball until I watched Haikyuu, and then that's when it hit me. I still don't care about volleyball, but Haikyuu is a damn good story, and that's what I care about. The same principle applies to sports manga, which came out in the 80s, and even going back to the 50s, which is when the first sports manga came out. And that was called Igakuriken, and it was about judo. With the release of Hajime no Ippo, we really started to see a significant rise in sports manga. People were starting to realise that sports and competition in general can include some seriously good character studies, which is why a lot of series just happens to include a tournament arc. It just works. Ippo is a non-stop tournament arc. The history of this sport only adds to the meat of Ippo's story. Did this revolutionise things? Was this the first boxing anime/manga which came out? Well, no, actually in 1968 there was a manga called Ashita no Joe, which is an absolute classic. It proved to the world, or at least kind of mostly Japan at the time, that yes, boxing can work in a story format. For the most part, boxing has had really good representation in the anime/manga community. The stories were eaten up by college students and the working class, and eventually it just became international. The climate of boxing itself couldn't have changed more, especially in the 60s. Previously, boxers, for the most part, were seen as desperate brawlers, tough guys who would get into the ring and slug it out for sometimes an unregulated amount of rounds just to get a decent paycheck. People like Sugar Ray Robinson, Jack Dempsey, Rocky Marciano were among the many to get recognised for their sheer willpower and pedigree. The more people who entered the ring to fight, the more we saw unique individuals provide the sport and the media which surrounded it with their own agendas and philosophies. Everything essentially changed with Muhammad Ali, who was in the midst of counterculture. He had to work against so many opposing forces, and slowly but surely he became this figurehead for the civil rights movement. Side by side with figures such as Malcolm X, who was kind of like a brother to Ali at one point, you have Martin Luther King Jr. and people like Gordon Parks, who was an amazing photographer. Check out some of his work, it's really good. This effectively changed the landscape of the sport. No longer was it just about two people getting into the squared circle to slug it out. Suddenly, audiences realised that combat sports was a battle of ideals. Boxers now had a voice to represent their beliefs, and where there is a voice, there is a story to be told. The narrative of the anime goes as follows. See, in every bout Ippo has, there's always a build-up to his opponent. Sometimes you end up loving the opponent, sometimes you absolutely despise them, but it does provide context to the character he has to defeat. I remember Jason Ozuma from the first season. He's just a lovely guy. You just don't want either of them to lose. The game is the game. Rather than build a direct hatred to every opponent Ippo faces, us as the audience sees a lineup of unique individuals, each with their own mentalities and philosophies and backgrounds and identities, and then you see them clash with someone else. All of these emotions come to the absolute forefront during these fights, alongside exposition, which a lot of the time provides us with some detailed insight into the smallest of techniques and decision making, which of course in a real fight happens in a split second, and this is just a testament to Morikawa's in-depth writing and pure understanding of boxing. Let's be honest, there were a lot of people who deserved to get absolutely destroyed by Ippo. Honestly, I should be in my bedroom just making videos about anime and talking about films, but instead, I'm here in a boxing gym. But hey, if you like this video, feel free to subscribe. Jesus. The art style of the series is insanely well polished. It carries the weight of emotion and blends it with the boxers' immense anatomies as they deal blows. This carries over into the anime really well. The classic season 1 has that retro 2000s look we all know and love. It's become an aesthetic in itself. And yet the action is of incredible quality. Ippo never really bulldozes an opponent off the bat. Instead, as the rounds go on, you see every drop of emotion from the visuals, and this carries on into the later seasons where it transitions into the clean modern look. A fictional story is only as good as the person who writes it, and Joji Morikawa, yeah, he's no joke. Morikawa is the definition of old school. I mentioned earlier that the series hasn't been distributed all that well, and this is purely down to Morikawa's kind of stubbornness at the start. For a long time, he was really opposed to putting his work out there online on streaming platforms and even having them translated to be distributed internationally, which, to be fair, with a manga as long as Hajime no Ippo, it's pretty hard to translate that many volumes. I mean, now it's on Crunchyroll and Netflix, so you guys can check it out. See, Morikawa was raised in the 60s, and though he must have been pretty young, he definitely caught the tail end of Muhammad Ali's reign, and he definitely experienced the reign of Mike Tyson. Maybe a few of you guys were around to see that. He even went to the Mike Tyson versus Buster Douglas fight, and yeah, that must have been heartbreaking. Spoilers, Mike lost. It's a real shame because I wasn't born soon enough to actually witness these legends fight, but I was born soon enough to see Jake Paul. Aren't we lucky? Morikawa was inspired by a fighting manga called Haris no Kaze back in elementary school. A long time after seeing this story, Morikawa decided he wanted to be an artist, and so he ended up working as an assistant alongside Shuichi Shigeno. That's the author of Initial D, and eventually Morikawa got his own assistant by the name of Kentaro Moira. Yeah, that Kentaro Moira. I was shocked too, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, very different vibes. Small world. Morikawa was so in love with the sport of boxing that in 1994 he opened JB Gym, which, okay, look, I'm sorry. That is one of the most awesome things a sports manga author could have possibly done. Okay, my guy just knew his stuff. The panels tell no lies. Hajime no Ippo became so popular in this climate because it encapsulated everything people loved to see. A true underdog story, an unlikely everyman who turns to the world of boxing, rising to glory by beating his meat.
何が大きいの？いやいや、こっちの話で。これだよ、これ。
Ippo's character is soft, light-hearted, and naturally kind. It's a massive contrast to the protagonists so many people had gotten used to, especially for Western audiences who were predominantly used to stern, stoic male protagonists. Ippo, alongside characters such as Goku and eventually Luffy, straight up broke social norms regarding masculinity. Boxing is a dangerous path, especially for compassionate people, because they have to learn to be ruthless in the ring. But this is what makes the story so engaging, because it's the juxtaposition of Ippo's character alongside the bloodiness of this sport. Like many people, I just adored Ippo Makaneuchi the second he appeared on screen. Ippo is initially vulnerable. He has to deal with the pressures of bullying alongside just trying to find out where he wants to go in life, because it's a very common adolescent problem. He's trying to support his mum and his family, and all of these pressures just annihilate his self-confidence, and they really lead to him not being able to aspire to anything. Of course, his life is turned around by none other than Takamura, who decimates everyone. Ippo's journey starts in a really natural way. In order to embrace sports, to potentially see a future in it, the first thing he has to learn is to love it. By studying the great boxers of the past, as recommended by his trainer, Genji Kamigawa, who was basically just the author, Morikawa, writing himself into the story, because Kamigawa He's the people's hero, okay? He's the legend. Ippo starts to transform his mentality. His self-belief grows because finally, above all, he has found a place where he is comfortable. He has no ego, just pure grit and the desire to keep getting back up. Your team is your rock. Your team keeps you going. When we find out how strong Ippo actually is, how hard he can punch, I absolutely love that Morikawa gave this soft, sweet person arguably one of the most aggressive styles in boxing, the peekaboo. Again, a testament to Mike Tyson's Customado style and Jack Dempsey's style. Two very aggressive guys. In essence, when Ippo steps into the ring, he becomes a more confident version of himself, and it's up to him to carry that energy into his day-to-day life. His training sequence is iconic, okay? Any Ippo fan has probably tried to catch a bunch of leaves in their hand at least once in their life. Yeah, just let me know how that went in the comment section. Takamura essentially becomes an older brother to Ippo, which to me is an absolutely natural and beautiful thing, because a lot of the time you'll have a protagonist just wander off into the mountains to train, do some bicep curls, come back a different person. This series is very much grounded in reality, okay? And that's a huge point of attractiveness for a lot of people, including myself, because it makes it more raw. A lot of what you see, from the training footage to the techniques involved, is legitimately useful for real life scenarios. But if you do want to fight an imaginary praying mantis in your basement, you go for it. That's on you. Combat sports moves at a lightning pace, not just the fights themselves, but the fighters and their trajectory through their career. Takamura is probably my favourite character in the franchise, just because of how he is seemingly an unstoppable force, and then slowly he is unpacked and you see his vulnerabilities. Early on, you get to witness the hardships and outright loneliness a lot of fighters need to go through during their camp, and my god, they go to dark places sometimes, okay? I found Takamura symbolized many great fighters who all had things going on behind closed doors, and it's an unappreciated aspect of the sport. It's something no one can fully understand unless they are in that scenario. It's such a unique take on a seemingly hardened character. I love Kumi, I love her caring relationship with Ippo. She's essentially Adrian to Ippo's Rocky, and it's a really underappreciated aspect, you know, partners of sports people, because the partners of these fighters share this intense mental pressure which their other half is going through. A great insight onto this is Paris Fury in the Tyson Fury doc, how she works so hard to keep everything afloat. There's a lot of weight on everyone's shoulders, not just the fighter. Why are the fight scenes so good? Well, let's just talk about the nature of boxing. There's a strange stigma in the boxing world that really isn't seen all that much in other combat sports platforms. If a guy in the UFC has a bunch of losses on his record, that guy is still a very much feared and respected person. When a boxer has a loss on their record, this can pretty much destroy their entire reality. A boxer will have their prime, and then when they lose, it becomes exceptionally more difficult to climb back up this metaphorical mountain, also known as their weight division. Some boxers just completely lose the mentality to fight in the way that they did before, and this happened to Mike Tyson. It's nothing to be ashamed of, that's just maturity and growth as a person. Your priorities change. It doesn't mean that a fighter can't climb back up the mountain, it's just a lot of the money involved in combat sports, especially boxing, is all down to tension. Who is going to have the loss on their record? The stakes are set ridiculously high for prized fighters, and it sucks it's like that. It really shouldn't be, because they should be respected whether or not they lose. There comes a time where every sportsman, every combat sports practitioner has to let the gig go, and for the majority of the time, this doesn't really happen when it should happen. You just can't keep going with this stuff. It takes too high of a toll on your body when you're at the professional level, and Morikawa provides us with a very real alternative, which Ippo takes eventually gladly, because he still loves boxing, he still appreciates the sport and appreciates what it done for him, and so he wants to provide that to other people. I believe Hajime no Ippo is timeless because it encapsulates the essence of boxing from the golden age of the sport. From the vast array of personalities and backgrounds, to the constant themes of perseverance and discipline, Ippo Makanauchi is a character who can inspire anyone in these turbulent times. And of course it's all sprinkled with some incredible animation so many artists have since taken inspiration from. From the techniques, from the emotional warfare, the grit, the determination to continue regardless of the adversary. It's no wonder Morikawa called this story the fighting spirit because, yeah man, that just doesn't die.